What's up guys, my name is Ace, and welcome back to The Breakdown. This is the series where I spectate randoms in Warzone, and I just go through, watch their gameplay, not in real time, so I can actually pause situations and look back. And the goal behind this is to share what players are doing right, what they're doing wrong, what I would have done differently in certain situations in order to help you improve. And the one I've got for you guys today, we've actually got a really good mix of players. We've got some absolute beasts that we're going to be spectating, and then we've also got some lower skill players that aren't quite as good at the game, and therefore there's a good variety of tips in this one. But let's just skip ahead to the first person I spectate. And with this guy, you can see he's already got 0 kills, so he didn't land really hot. He didn't try and get into a fight right away. And this is the first thing that I noticed that he does wrong. He has a gray C58, so no attachments on it, and he decides to swap it out for a purple Carve 2. Rarity level and the number of attachments that a gun has, it doesn't really represent the true power of that gun. This guy appears to be likely a beginner player or somebody that's not super confident with the game, probably doesn't know the weapon stats all that well. He sees a higher rarity gun and therefore he picks it up. In reality, that gray C58 is better than the Carve 2 in almost every situation you can think of, and he definitely should have stuck with that C58 instead of that. But that's just a little thing I wanted to point out. I'm sure most of you guys that watch my channel a lot will already know that, because you guys are here for weapon stats and stuff, primarily at least. Now, right here, he can hear some fights going on. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit here into this situation. So there's obviously a fight that just went down straight in front of him, and he wants to approach that fight and hopefully kill the person that just won that gunfight there. He's aimed down sight walking here, which is great for keeping yourself quiet. He's also pre-aiming that corner just in case somebody does come back around that corner. However, it's also worth noting he has dead silence right now, and he chooses not to use this. Now, it could have just been an oversight. Maybe he didn't realize he had dead silence or he forgot. But now is the perfect time to be popping that dead silence while approaching this enemy. Then, as he comes around this corner, you can see where the enemy player died. He was up in this area right here. You can see where his loot is. After a gunfight, what do most players do? They want to get armored up, and usually when they do that, they want to find a nice safe space. So, 9 times out of 10 in this particular situation, after knowing that fight just went down, I would expect the enemy player to be in this little cubby here, armoring up and getting themselves ready to go for another fight. Unfortunately, this player isn't aware of that. They don't even check in there at all, and they get taken out. So he did multiple things wrong there. He should have popped dead silence, and he should have absolutely expected that enemy player to be in that cubby, either armoring up or reloading, just getting ready after that fight he was just in. So some pretty obvious mistakes there. Now let's move into the next player here. And with this guy, right away, I can tell he's a much more confident player. Looks like he's actually going around and trying to hunt people. And he also has a decent headset because he hears some footsteps below him, so he pops dead silence, as you should in a situation like this. So now you have that massive advantage over the player that you're about to challenge, because you can hear them, but now they won't be able to hear you as you approach, and he just picks up a super easy kill there. Part of that was just luck. He just happened to hear a guy that went under him. I don't think he knew that guy was there until he heard the footsteps, but it made for a really easy kill, and that just shows the importance of a headset. Now, like I said, this guy does appear to be a more confident player. It looks like he's actually going and hunting for kills. So he goes to the nearest buy station here to buy a UAV, and then he just uses that information to hunt for his next kill. Because at this stage in the game, very few people will have the ghost perk active. So if you are an aggressive player, sometimes, if you're really confident at least, you're better off going for a UAV right away instead of your loadout, because then you can go and hunt for ghosted players. That is, of course, assuming you have a decent ground loot weapon, and again, assuming you're very confident in your gun skills. But as he approaches his first target here, I like that he doesn't just take the vehicle straight toward him, especially because he doesn't have a trophy system on there, so he could be easily killed, and also the enemy will see him coming from a mile away. Instead, what I like that he does here is he gets up and gets the high ground on him. And this could be risky in some situations sometimes, because now you're exposing yourself to a wide area of the map. But like I said, he's got a UAV active, and at this stage in the game, almost nobody will have the ghost perk. So he's got a pretty good indication that he's safe from other areas, and this guy that he's approaching is his only potential threat. So he's approaching from the high ground, which is great. He maintains his high ground here. He jumps across instead of dropping down, and that just helps him win this gunfight pretty effectively. Obviously, he was also much more prepared for that gunfight. So again, having that UAV early game is just such a massive advantage over other players. Now, next up, he's going to be approaching this other player that he can see on the UAV. He's showing up with a very clear red dot here, and he can also see that player is coming toward him. So as he armors up and gets ready, he goes to challenge this guy. And I do like how he handles this for the most part. Like, he doesn't take a shot here unnecessarily and then potentially expose his position. I realize he's using a suppressor, but even a good player will hear exactly where a suppressed shot is coming from, or at least a general indication, and they'll come for you. And he sees the enemy, pops a recon right here. And I love, again, he goes for the high ground first to come and challenge this guy. A lot of players would stay on the low ground and they just sprint straight toward that. He gets up top, gets that high ground, and then he does decide to drop down later, but that's just to get a better angle on him. Honestly, if you were trying to play it as tight as possible there, he probably should have maintained the high ground on that. But the problem with that is if he would have approached on that high ground, he would have then ended up in footstep range of that enemy before being able to see that enemy. And the way that he dropped down like that, it forced that angle so he could see the enemy player without getting within footstep range. Now, in this next situation, as he's approaching over toward this buy station, he's trying to get himself another UAV. I just wanted to point out right about here, he does notice an enemy right in this area. Oh, he's actually right below where my face cam is. Hang on a second. I'll just get rid of my face cam stuff here. You can see an enemy very clearly right here, and he definitely sees him, and he's standing right in front of him. So it's very likely that that enemy player will see him as well. Let's get my face cam back and just see how this situation plays out. They both run for cover. It's actually kind of funny, and that's the right thing to do right there most of the time. He wasn't ready for that fight, and just standing out in the open and taking that fight would have been dumb, so he gets his cover. However, then he comes back out, and again, that enemy player pretty clearly saw him. He sees him run to cover, and instead of this player doing something to find some cover, he stands out in the open and just pre-aims here. I think he got a little bit overconfident in his gun skill. He didn't think that enemy player would be able to just dominate him in the gunfight there. But that's a great example of just being overconfident in your gun skill and not utilizing cover effectively. So he ended up being punished for that. It also turns out there's another player just hanging out right here. So that was quite interesting. But we will see the other player end up killing this guy. Just as we switch over to the spectating. I didn't get to see the situation leading up to that. He likely just heard that guy's footsteps earlier, and he was able to approach him from there. But now we are spectating a beast. This guy is very good. He is one of the top players in the lobby, and he is very clearly kill hunting. He is just attacking people, attacking every single person he can find, and he actually does quite well, as you guys will see. And let's get into the first guy he's hunting here after he pops his UAV. We can very clearly see there's a guy on top of Atlas Superstore. I did want to point out with the dot here, there's a little arrow above the dot. That means the guy is on a higher elevation and therefore the rooftop. If that little arrow was below the dot, he would be below this guy's current elevation. And if there's no little arrow, that means he's at least reasonably close to your elevation. So he knows he's on the rooftop, and he wants to approach this guy. I kind of like how he handles the situation. His UAV does expire, but he wants to get up there and get the kill on this guy. And what he does instead is uses his heartbeat sensor to figure out if that guy has moved away. Keeping in mind, heartbeat sensors have a 50-meter range, and he wants to come up onto this little zip line here. I love that he uses his heartbeat sensor to check this first. Obviously, that guy doesn't have Ghost, and there's no way he got Ghost within those past few seconds. So before making this move and going up there, which could be very risky, he now knows that that enemy isn't within 50 meters of the top of this little zip line. So it is relatively safe to come up here and approach this guy. Now he's just got to figure out where he was. Now he's just got to figure out where this guy moved to. And yeah, he's just using his heartbeat sensor to figure that out. It looks like he's probably behind this little shed right here. So he just gets ready for the fight. He's pre-aiming. A little bit risky to have the heartbeat sensor out again in that situation, but this guy's a very good player, very confident in his gun skill, and he was able to take that guy out with relative ease. Now, moving on to this guy's next victim, he goes and buys another UAV after that fight, also gets a vehicle with a trophy system on it. He threw a trophy system there, and just like that previous player we were spectating, I love that he goes for the high ground. As long as you know it's reasonably safe to take the high ground and you're not just going to get sniped by somebody, which even at this stage in the game, it's still reasonably safe to be assuming that a lot of people don't have Ghost, because even the people that will get their loadouts, they'll typically go for like an overkill loadout at this point. He's hunting this player that he can see on his minimap. I love that he pops Dead Silence. He takes that high ground, and this is basically an unwinnable situation for this player right here. He's not going to hear him approach. Dead Silence is incredibly powerful in this game, and it was just a super easy kill for this guy. Now, moving on to the next player that he's going to be hunting here. He actually picked up a bounty. He can see that enemy is somewhere in the parking garage area, and this player is also going to be stressed because the gas is going to be pushing here, and this gas is going to be fast moving since the gap between the edge of the circle and the gas is quite large here. So this player is likely going to be a fairly easy kill because he is being forced in this direction actively. And therefore, most of the players that are going to be doing that are easy pickings for good players. So with this, he's pushing up. He sees the enemy hop into the window right there. So he posts up on this rock. He's got a great position on him. Decent piece of cover. However, that enemy does know he's here, and he almost lost this gunfight. I was actually pretty impressed with the enemy in that situation. That was obviously a pretty solid player that challenged him right there. And that peeker's advantage that he gained almost won him the fight against this guy. But I also want to point out his movement within that gunfight. If he wouldn't have done a crouch and then a jump shot in this fight, it's very likely he would have ended up losing it. So his evasion technique in the fight was actually very, very helpful in this situation. So watch really closely what he does with his movement as he engages in this fight right here. So the enemy is going to peek from the right side and jump shot him on the right. He crouches and then he jump shots. Both of those combined, he's also strafing a little bit to the side. That managed to help him dodge a couple bullets there, and it definitely saved his life. Now, after that fight, immediately he goes to get another UAV. Again, the earlier the game, the more valuable UAVs are going to be. And again, he sees another enemy way up top here, and this is going to be another situation where that enemy really needs to be actively running straight toward the circle because that gas is moving fast. So this is likely going to be a fairly easy kill as well. So he's pushing straight toward them, and we're about to see a really cool move that some top players do. It's a great little finesse move that works very effectively, and that is he swaps seats as he's approaching this target. That makes you a really unpredictable target, because if you see someone approaching you in a vehicle, even good players will often think, you know what, I can probably just beam him out of that driver's seat and just pick him off. But it turns out he's sitting next to the driver's seat. He's sitting in the passenger seat, and he's able to shoot from there as well, which most players just don't expect. Even good players often don't see that coming. So really cool move on his part. I think it was kind of unnecessary, maybe a little bit showing off, but it worked out very, very well for him. So props for that play. Very, very well done. One thing I do want to point out is you never want to try that move on an ATV or a motorcycle because you don't move sideways, you just move to the backseat position. And while you can shoot from there, you're still going to be directly in line with where they'd be aiming to try and kill you off of that vehicle. So yeah. But then again, he sees another person, which again is being pushed heavy by the gas. This is what good players tend to do if they are hunting for high kills. You want to hunt for those players that are on the wide side of the gap between the gas and the circle, and the players that are just riding the edge of that gas. These tend to be players that aren't very confident, and they also tend to be put into situations where they have to be doing a certain thing, like running in a straight line toward the circle, and therefore they're almost always just easy pickings for skilled players, and that's exactly what he's doing here. He might not be the most skilled at driving, though, as we can see there. Happens to the best of us. It's fine. I love that he positions himself with that piece of cover there, with that truck, and again, just a really easy gunfight win. I love the fact that the way this guy is approaching these situations, he's really setting himself up to have the advantage. He puts himself between the circle and the enemy player rather than between the gas and the enemy player. He also gains cover, and just doing those two things in a situation like that is almost a guaranteed win. Now, as he's approaching his target over here, he's trying to scan things out while he's in the vehicle without just going straight for that target, and I like that. He's not just getting tunnel vision and driving straight toward him. And I think he noticed there might have been a guy in that building. He's checking his back here. He does get shot by somebody from behind, and the thing I like that he does here is instead of just turning and challenging this guy, which he doesn't know his exact position, he can kind of have an indication of the direction. He doesn't know that player's exact position, and he also had no cover in that situation. Instead of immediately just trying to challenge, he tries to just finesse himself out of that situation, get some cover, regroup himself a little bit, and then he can challenge with more information and hopefully get another armor plate in before having to engage in that fight. So really well played there. If you get caught out in the open like that and somebody takes you off guard, it's often in your best interest to just get to cover and don't worry about trying to figure out exactly where that player is or trying to challenge him. Just get to cover. So we can kind of tell this was a really hot zone. He just killed a couple players there. There's also a lot of gunshots going on around him. And so that's pretty sketchy, and this is one of the downsides of hunting for those kills in the wide side of the circle. As it's closed in like this area becomes extremely hot. You're going to get a lot of players here, and even if you're confident in your gun skill and you feel like you're much more skilled than the average player you're going to run into, having 3 enemy players that are even below average in your area can really easily screw you over. You can very easily get overwhelmed by lesser skilled players if there's just a lot of them. And that's what ends up biting this guy, is he overstays his welcome in this hot zone. And I think he should have ended up just getting out of this position once he realizes, like, there's shots coming in from the left here toward that vehicle. So there's a guy to his left that's going to have the high ground on him, on the hill to his left here. He's also challenging and trying to get this kill on this guy. He really overcommits on this fight here. And now his back is exposed to the player that's up on this hill. I tried to point that out on the minimap. Now we've also got another guy across the little valley there on the high ground over there shooting at him. So he has multiple enemy players now that have a superior position on him and an advantage on him, and he doesn't have too much cover or ways to escape. He tries his best to finesse himself out of this situation, but right now, I would just be trying my absolute best to get myself out of this position completely and just regroup myself, because he is overwhelmed at this point. I like that he saves his precision airstrike for this type of a situation to try and buy himself out of that sketchy situation. But he ends up just getting overwhelmed here, and that's no surprise. There's just too much going on right now. I think he tries to make his escape here. It just doesn't work out, unfortunately. His vehicle gets disabled, and he just gets overwhelmed by too many people in the vicinity. He was likely more skilled than a lot of these players, but skill isn't always going to buy you out of a 3v1 situation like that. Now, moving on to this next player here, I just want to point out he gets sniped from the left side here, or sniped at. You can see that bullet tracer came from roughly around that area. He doesn't even need to know the exact position. He just needs to know the general vicinity, which he does. He recognizes the player was somewhere around there, and he wants to rotate around and try and challenge that guy. Now, what he does is he gets himself completely away from any form of cover. He's now standing out in the open, no pieces of cover between him and the enemy player. He's kind of screwed right now, and he's taking fire. At this point, this is exactly where that previous situation comes in, where at this point, you just want to get to cover. You don't want to try and challenge this fight, no matter how confident you are in your gun skill. You don't want to challenge this fight unless you absolutely need to, and that's exactly what he does. He tries to challenge it. He would have been better off just trying to back off, maybe slide back behind that truck, slide to this rock over on the right side of the screen as you're looking at it right now, or his left in that situation. He should have tried to get out of that position that he put himself in rather than trying to challenge from the open. Now, getting into the next player here, he's sort of out in the open, and he's trying to play the edge of the circle over here. And I just wanted to point out one thing that I'm not really a big fan of what he does here, and that is he aims down sight with his sniper rifle in order to scan his surroundings to try and find enemy players. And while this isn't always a bad idea, the problem with this is you're going to be giving off that sniper glint, and he did this before even trying to scan without the scope. Try to scan without your scope first, see if you can detect any movement, and then if you're really suspicious about a particular area, then aim down sight with your sniper scope to get a better view on that. You generally don't want to be scanning with your sniper scope like that, though. But he ends up taking fire from an enemy there. He's got himself positioned well. He's between all these rocks, so he's using cover really effectively, which ended up saving him from that situation, although he could have been headshotted there. But as he plates up here, he doesn't know exactly where this enemy player is, and he pops a UAV to try and figure that out. So he doesn't realize this, but he's trying to challenge this guy with his sniper, and I don't like how he does this. I wouldn't recommend doing this, peeking slowly around a corner on a guy that's already got a bead on your position with a sniper rifle very clearly, and you're just opening yourself up for a really easy headshot for the enemy player, because he's likely going to be pre-aiming you at this point and just waiting for that peek. So if it were up to me, I would have maybe jumped out of cover to avoid that peek shot that he would have on you, to try and figure out where his position is. It's highly unlikely he'd hit a headshot at that point. And instead, he did that slow peek around with his scope up. And while he did win that gunfight, and you might be thinking like, oh, why does it matter? He won the gunfight. It's still important to recognize that even though you win a situation, it doesn't mean you handled it well. He did not handle that situation well, in my opinion. He ended up actually taking a shot from that enemy player, you'll see, before he ended up getting a shot off on him. And if that shot happened to have been a headshot, it's game over for this guy. So, like I said, he didn't play this situation well. You shouldn't slow peek around with a scope up, because your ADS strafe speed is very slow at this point. But like I said, he did manage to come out on top, so good for him. He got lucky, but he probably should have died against a more skilled player there. He would have been picked off. Now, moving on a little bit, same player. He's approaching this high ground on the hill here. The circle is starting to shrink, so this is where positioning starts to be very, very important, and you want to pay a lot of attention to elevation. So he wants this high ground, and he took it, and he cleared out that area nicely and safely. However, again, I don't like what he's doing here. He's standing so exposed right now. He's got very little cover around him, and there are so many positions right now that a sniper could easily shoot him in the head from. It's unbelievable how many positions somebody could snipe him from the head from right now. Like, he is so exposed, and he's just standing out in the open, aiming down sight, which restricts his movement, his ability to strafe back and forth to maybe try and dodge a headshot. Like, if you are going to be peeking out in the open like that, at least strafe back and forth. Keep yourself moving. Throw some crouches in there. Just make yourself a really hard headshot to hit, at least for any sort of competent sniper. But again, he's like aiming down sight to get that extra zoom, which I kind of understand why you'd want to do that, but you got to be very selective about when you do that and how you do that because it restricts that movement so much. And I just hate his positioning right now. He has got no cover to get to. If someone starts lighting him up with a Farah, for instance, if somebody peeked from this window down here in this barn and mounted on there with a Farah, this dude's going to get beamed before he has any chance of getting to cover. So terrible positioning on his part right now. Like, the position on the map is good. It's just the location where he's positioned and the fact that he doesn't have any cover available to him is terrible right now. And he's really opening himself up to being taken out very easily. And it turns out he actually does this for several minutes. Like, he moves from position to position a little bit, but he's doing the same exact thing, exposing himself to the huge portion of the map and just standing still. Terrible, terrible idea. Please don't do this. You're just such an easy snipe to hit. Now, he does finally decide to rotate around toward the outside edge of the circle, which is nice. I like that he did this. This is a good move just to make sure there's nobody camping the edge of the circle here and just trying to crouch their way up here to get behind you, because you'll get people like that in solo modes like all the time. Unfortunately, he didn't properly check these rocks here. You can't check everything, and honestly, I don't blame him too much for dying in that situation. That guy just had the jump on him, had a great piece of cover, was just sitting and waiting to hear footsteps. And he was able to win the gunfight simply because he heard those footsteps of the enemy player. These types of situations are just going to happen in solo modes. And moving on to this next guy, the guy that just killed the previous guy, he's a much more cautious player. He's crouch walking around even when he's out in the open over here. And again, I don't like that he sits completely still like this with the lack of cover that he has. At least he has much more cover than the previous guy that was exposing himself to like the entire map. But still, the fact that he's sitting still for so long makes me really uneasy because, again, any competent sniper, if they happen to see you here, that's the easiest headshot in the world to hit. So even if you're trying to do something like that, just throw a little bit of movement in there. Never stand completely still. But I like that he's pushing up toward the circle here. He is moving from cover to cover. He likes using these little trios of rocks, and which is great because that'll cover you from multiple directions. And he's very cautious of this barn over here, which is for good reason. People love to camp in buildings in solo game modes, and they will camp there until the gas literally forces them out of that building. So he's being very aware of that. He's constantly checking his back as well. And generally speaking, I like what he's doing here. He's not necessarily like the highest skilled player I've ever seen, just judging by the way he's approaching situations and moving, but at least he's got some decent awareness of what's going on around him. Although, again, he's standing still for far too long. Throw a few crouches in there, throw some strafing in there. Don't just stand perfectly still, especially when you start to get to a stage of the game like this. So he waited to see if anybody was pushed out by the gas there. Nobody was, so he now knows that was safe. That's great. He's now cleared that area. He can feel safe from behind, at least for the most part, unless somebody decided to camp in there extra long with a gas mask. But that's pretty good. I would be very concerned about somebody potentially coming up over the ridge right here. They would have a perfect head glitch, or they could be coming up here or here. They have so many areas where they could pop out of, and this player is not really great with his angles right now. This piece of cover isn't going to protect you from multiple angles. If somebody peeked that ridge and then somebody also peeked the ridge over here, this guy is in a very, very difficult situation to win. So not the greatest positioning, but it's not like he has a ton of options either. But in either case, now the gas is about to force him out of his position. He is going to have to move in toward that circle. There's not a whole lot of cover options in that direction, so I wouldn't recommend traveling in that direction right now just because where is he going to go? Where is your next piece of cover? You should always be thinking that, especially in a situation like this where it's late game and there's not very many options for cover. You should always be thinking, where's my next piece of cover? And also, where should I expect enemies to be coming from? He's being very cautious about this building. Same situation as the barn from earlier. You got to be very cautious about people that may be camping in there until they're actually forced out. However, I don't like that he's sitting here with his Cold War MP5 right now. This thing isn't super accurate. In a gunfight at that range against somebody in that house coming around that little fence there, or wall, or whatever you want to call it, this gun is not going to compete well against most guns that player would have. So like a Farah or a C58 or something, this MP5 is going to lose that 9 times out of 10. He has a Kar 98 as a secondary, and this is where I'd want that Kar 98 out, even just to hit a first shot on him to get him weak, and then you can swap to the MP5 and finish him off. This is really sketchy to be laying here with an MP5. You will be able to hear footsteps approach for close quarters if needed, and that will give you time to swap from your Kar to the MP5, but he just doesn't do that. It ends up not biting him in the butt here because nobody was actually in that house. Quite surprisingly, actually. I was almost certain somebody would be coming around that corner there, but they ended up not doing that. And now we decide to pull his sniper rifle out and scan some areas here. So there's almost definitely going to be at least one player in that house. That's just a given. There's 2 other players left in the game aside from this player. So right now, what you want to be listening for is for that third party. If there are 3 people left in solo game modes and you hear a gunfight go down, you must push that immediately, because most likely that player is going to have to recover from that fight. They're going to have to reload. If they get shot at, they're going to have to armor up. So right there, gunfight goes down. He should be pushing. He should be making that move right now, being aggressive. Don't let that guy regroup. Don't let him reload. Don't let him get any armor plates in. Push immediately. Instead, he waits, and he's also standing in the open right now. He's got no cover here. He's not in a good position, and he's now exposing himself to the enemy peeking right here. If the enemy peeks right here, this player's got to think, where do I go? What do I do? And right now, he is not positioned well to handle that situation. So this just does not play out very well for him. Now, he does end up strafing over and getting himself out of there. That's great. He should recognize he has a precision airstrike at his disposal, and especially because the enemy just called one in as well. That should have reminded him, like, hey, I've got an airstrike, and now is the time to be using it. If you call that airstrike in, you limit that player's options quite a bit, and you might also just get a free kill on him with the airstrike itself. So he should have really been just taking cover, pulling in his airstrike out right now, and calling it in to restrict that guy's movements. I actually kind of like what he does right here, though, and that is he goes for the gas play. This is often unexpected. They will typically expect players to not go into the gas actively like this, so it's actually often in your best interest to make a gas play like this. However, what he does here is, instead of checking that area where the enemy just was and where he should be expecting that enemy to be before exiting the gas and before exposing yourself to him, he ends up running out into the open and also out of the gas, therefore forcing that animation to take the gas mask off. He put himself in a situation where he had no chance of fighting back. He should have actually been a little bit more patient there. That gas mask wasn't broken yet. He had a little bit more time, and he should have tried to challenge from inside the gas so that that gas mask animation wouldn't screw him over, at least not until the gas mask broke. But that ended up getting him killed there. Don't be afraid to linger in the gas a bit if you've got a gas mask active, or even if you don't have a gas mask active. In a situation like that, sometimes you just have to challenge the fight from inside the gas, because that's just your best bet. But in either case, didn't work out for him. Other player got the win, and there we have it. That's going to wrap it up for today's episode. I'd like to hear in the comments section below, what did you guys think about this? Again, any sort of improvements that you could suggest for this series. I'm still trying to sort of flesh it out. I am going to add the stats of the players as well as the lobby. A lot of people have been suggesting that because several other YouTubers do that as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.